Breaking news on News Nation. Letitia James, the New York State Attorney General, has just been indicted on a federal fraud charge, indicted in the Eastern District of Virginia. One count of mortgage fraud after an investigation is what we're hearing.
We are following this breaking news. The clerk of the Court of Eastern Virginia says a grand jury has indicted New York Attorney General Letitia James.
I understand we have some legal breaking news.
Yeah, we have just learned that New York Attorney General Letitia James, who obviously brought the charges and won against President Donald Trump, has just been indicted by the Department of Justice.
Okay, if you're watching this video, I'm going to lay out the evidence against Letitia James. I'm going to lay out her defenses, and you are going to come to the decision whether she's going to be found guilty of these charges or whether this is a whole nothing burger. Now, here's a quick message from the sponsor of this video, Crypto.com. Let's be clear, cryptocurrency isn't coming, it's already here. And this next move made it official. Now, Trump Media has just signed a massive $6.4 billion deal with Yorkville Acquisition Group and Crypto.com. Yeah, that Crypto.com. The platform is trusted by millions of users worldwide. Now, here's the big play. They're teaming up to scoop up billions of CRO. That's the token powering Crypto.com's entire ecosystem. Fast transactions, low fees, and even real-world perks like cash back when you spend. So, the goal, build America's first CRO treasury called the Trump Media Group CRO strategy. And when all is said and done, this new company becomes the largest publicly traded CRO holder in the world. Head to Crypto.com today to make crypto great again. Now, this segment is sponsored by Crypto.com. Nothing here is financial advice. Always do your own research before investing. Now, back to the madness. Okay, so first let's start off with the indictment. We got one count of bank fraud in violation of 18 U.S.C. section 1344, and count 2 are false statements to a financial institution in violation of 18 U.S.C. section 1014. Now, in this document, the federal government is alleging that Letitia James committed a specific type of mortgage fraud, known as occupancy fraud.
I wanted to do a video about occupancy fraud because it's the #1 fraud in the mortgage industry. This means people will say that they're going to live in a home so they can get the primary residence interest rate, which is much lower than the investment property interest rate. But really their intention is to rent it out. Also, on a primary residence, you can get that loan with a much smaller down payment, sometimes as little as 5% down, whereas on a rental property, you need 20% down or more. So people will, shocker, lie, and that's a fraud, and that's a big deal. This is what underwriting is for. Our underwriters, everybody's underwriters are looking for any kind of fraud, and it's enough that it's the #1 fraud in the industry, and it's enough that it's something that it's always looked for.
Now, the government shows some exhibits to prove its case. First, this specific power of attorney signed on the 17th day of August 2023 by Letitia James. And to make sure this was Letitia James, this was notarized with 2 witnesses. Now, shockingly enough, those 2 witnesses actually worked in the Attorney General's office of the city of New York, which is unbelievable. And this document states, quote, "I hereby declare that I intend to occupy this property as my principal residence." What property are we talking about? We're talking about the purchase of the property known as 604 Sterling, Norfolk, Virginia, 23505. Then the government provides Exhibit B, which is the deed of trust. Now, when you look at page 6 of 11, it defines what occupancy means.
6 of the deed of trust deals with occupancy. And here's what you're actually committing to. Borrower shall occupy, establish, and use the property as the borrower's principal residence within 60 days after execution of this security instrument, and shall continue to occupy the property as borrower's principal residence for at least 1 year after the date of occupancy. And then here's the crucial part. Unless lender otherwise agrees in writing, which consent shall not be unreasonably withheld, or unless extenuating circumstances exist which are beyond the borrower's control.
Now, just to break this down, if you're going to live in the home, you're going to get favorable loan terms. If you're not going to live in the home or are going to use it as rental property, you're going to have to pay more money. So the indictment, paragraph 8, alleges, quote, "This misrepresentation allowed James to obtain favorable loan terms not available for investment properties, including a note rate of 3%, avoiding a 0.815 higher comparable investment property rate of 3.815%, resulting in approximately $17,800 $837 in rate savings over the life of the loan. A seller credit of approximately $3,288, exceeding the seller credit for investment properties by approximately $1,096, for a total ill-gotten gains of approximately $18,933 over the life of the loan. Now, one thing that usually hampers a fraud case is that you have to intend to commit the fraud. It can't just be by an accident. And the government has some real interesting evidence that this was no accident. This was fraud. For instance, the government said in paragraph 9 that James' universal property application for homeowners insurance indicated owner-occupied non-seasonal use, further misrepresenting the intended use of the property, essentially making it seem like she was going to live there when she wasn't. Now, paragraph 10 shows you how dumb the New York AG was, because remember, she couldn't rent out the property because if she did rent out the property, she would have to pay a higher loan rate. So she said that she wasn't going to rent out the property and she was going to live there herself. But then on her own tax filing, she said that she got thousands of dollars of rent received from the property and even claimed deductions for expenses related to the property. So let me break this down so we can know exactly what the government has and what they're saying about Letitia James before we get into her defense. 1, she claimed that the Norfolk home was her secondary residence and that she was going to live there for better loan term. 2, she signed a second home rider promising that she was going to live there, which she didn't. 3rd, she actually rented the property out to tenants after telling the bank that she wasn't going to rent it out to tenants. 4, then she reported rental income on her own tax returns from the property that she couldn't actually rent. 5, she told the insurance company that it was a owner-occupied home to get a better insurance rate. So it looks like Tish James has a major problem because all this documentary evidence makes it look like she may be in trouble for some fraud. So now Letitia James and her attorneys have responded to some of these allegations. So I'm going to play you her response and what her defense is likely to be. Now, just to be clear, Letitia James concedes that this property in Virginia is not her primary residence and never has been.
The key allegation, again, it sounds like you don't want to address them here, but I'm just going to put it out so people understand that a property that was owned in Virginia, a mortgage that you signed, if I'm not mistaken, for that property, that they say you falsely represented yourself as a resident of Virginia, and that was essentially amounts to mortgage fraud since you're a resident of New York. What is your response to that?
It's baseless. Everybody knows I'm a resident of New York, specifically Brooklyn. And again, we will respond at the appropriate time in the appropriate way to these baseless allegations. And some media outlets like the Daily News over the weekend has indicated as much.
That's all you want to say?
That's all that I'm going to say.
Now, Letitia James' attorney also wrote a letter to the DOJ responding to the mortgage fraud allegations. In that letter, she does say here that it was mistakenly stated that the property would be Miss James' principal residence. She also goes on that she made a, quote, very clear in all caps statement 2 weeks earlier to the mortgage loan broker that, quote, this property will not be my primary residence. And she attached the email and the Section 5 declaration where it says, will you occupy the property as your primary residence? And it's checked no. She also attached another email from the day before where she asked the loan broker straight out, where's the form that indicates this property is not my primary residence? I cannot find it. So now the problem with these documents is that they are from 2023 as the date here in the emails indicate. But if we go back to the indictment, the loan was acquired or assigned to First Savings Bank in March of 2021, 2 years earlier. So we're talking about something that happened in 2021, and she's saying, hey, in 2023, I told the bank I actually wasn't living there. Now, if these documents are to be believed, it shows that her intent was not to list the Virginia residence as her primary residence. Now, where does this leave us? Well, for the government to sustain charges of criminal mortgage fraud, the government must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Letitia James knowingly made false statements to induce a financial institution to lend her this money. Now, obviously, the government is going to show the sworn documents with 2 witnesses where she signed saying that she intended this property to be her primary residence as proof that she intentionally tried to induce the financial institution to lend her money at favorable rates. Now, this, along with the other evidence in the document, clearly is enough to to establish probable cause that a crime had been committed and that Letitia James is the one that committed this particular crime. But when looking at the full context, you do have these other declarations that clearly show that Letitia James made it very clear that she didn't want to even make it seem that she lived in the property in Virginia. Quote, "Will you occupy the property as your primary residence?" She checked no. Then she even sent an email to the loan broker who was putting together the paperwork to also say, "Where's the form that indicates that property is not my primary residence? I can't find it." Now remember, the government's burden here is beyond a reasonable doubt, and you have to demonstrate that this was willful misconduct. Tish James is going to claim this was a mistake. I didn't intend to defraud anyone, even with all this evidence the government has presented. Now why is that important? Because if this is generally just a mistake where you have all these conflicting documents, then you will not be able to prove the willful misconduct piece of it, and she would not be able to be convicted.
I will respond to these baseless allegations at the appropriate time and in the appropriate way, but I am 100% confident that it will not result in any criminal indictment or action against me.
Now, obviously, they're not baseless because you do have a document that she signed with 2 witnesses in front of a notary that essentially says, "I will be a primary resident of Virginia." So that makes the case not baseless. But now I leave it up to you, my wonderful audience. Do you think Tish James is going to jail? I right now put it at 60-40. I think the government has a pretty strong case. Tish James' excuses seem to be years later in 2023, but the government is saying, hey, we're talking about a loan you took out in 2020 and 2021. So like I said before, let me know in the comments section, but I think Tish James has a serious problem. Now, if you like this type of content, don't forget, like, share, subscribe, do all that great YouTube stuff. My name is Nate the Lawyer, and these are the facts. Don't let anybody fool you. Peace.